After I reviewed Avenged Sevenfold's Hail to the King, many of you asked me why I never touched any of their older albums, why I never reviewed any of their Elder Scrolls, so to speak. And since we're going to be doing them pretty much all at once on this day, well, I figured that it's time to answer a couple of those questions as well. So, one of the main reasons why I think that is because in order to talk about an album such as, for example, Sounding of the Seventh Trumpet, their very first album, we kind of have to take our minds back to 2001 whenever it was released, January 31st to be exact. And we have to remember what was going on musically in that time frame. And then we have to further discuss how the album has aged 14 years later. So we're going to do that, and I feel that I'm a lot better at kind of doing that these days as opposed to back whenever the channel first started. Mainly because whenever the channel first started, you look at everything through the eyes of just what's happening right now as opposed to what was happening then. So think about 2001, think about the time right. Think about what was going on. Think about how metalcore was really just first starting to get its legs. I mean, the movement was definitely raising some eyebrows and definitely causing a lot of attention, but this was not a full-fledged, overtaken force. This was definitely a musical landscape where nu metal still had a grip, although its grip was starting to really loosen a good bit. So whenever Avenged Sevenfold came out with their first album, and it really kind of combined great heavy metal riffing in the style of perhaps bands such as Metallica or Iron Maiden, and then had that metalcore style that was really kind of taking off at this time frame, this was definitely a great and unique idea. This was one that seemed to combine two things that metalheads traditionally loved, and that's always a good sign for what's to come. That being said, this was not the version of the band that was going to be the platinum selling machine that we know today. There was no way that this band in this version was going to achieve the rabid fan base, not to mention really just become one of the biggest bands on the planet right now. And like the band or not, that is a true statement. This is just an album that feels as though it itself is a feeling out process. I'm sure that it was an extremely potent accomplishment whenever it was first recorded and released for the group. I'm sure that they were extremely satisfied with the results. But to go back, whenever we kind of examine this album 14 years later, there's a lot of roughness to this. This is an album that's meant to be a bit gruff. It's not meant to all be, just a very solid and steady horse race. This is instead one that focuses mainly on the harder edge of Avenged Sevenfold's core sound. The one that has a lot more aggression in tune to it, the one that has actual growling vocals to it, the one that definitely focuses a lot more on the metalcore characteristics as opposed to what they would do later, because at this point in time, this was Avenged Sevenfold. And the results are spotty. This is definitely an album that I feel suffers somewhat from having just a little bit too much on it. A couple of songs definitely have a very similar makeup to them. It's a band that was experimenting very lightly with songwriting, getting into a rhythm, getting into a groove about that which they knew how to write best. This was not going to be an album of expansive thought. This was instead going to be one where they did some things and definitely were just trying to get their name out there. Now there is a track where M. Shadows' wife actually does the lead vocals, which definitely marks a keynote difference whenever you listen to the flow of this album, mainly because this is probably the vocals that sound the most aggressive and more just out of control by comparison to the rest of the album. This is one song that certainly feels just over the top a little bit. And that's actually not a bad thing. On an album like this, that kind of aggression definitely marks as a great breakpoint. If I may use a more modern example, on the newest Linkin Park album, for example, the song War is just thunderous. It's probably the most aggressive Linkin Park song out there, and it breaks up an album that was trying to be a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more geared toward their first album, Hybrid Theory, and actually went to the next level. This is a song for Avenged Sevenfold that definitely felt like it was being taken to the next level. Overall, this album flows relatively nice. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. There are some moments where I feel like it takes some real hard lefts or right turns, and it just kind of leaves you a little bit confused. But overall, the songwriting itself is where the strength sort of saves it a little bit. these are songs that keep you involved enough just to keep you on board. This is not necessarily going to be an album that you're going to feel inclined to listen to over and over again in one sitting. It's instead one where you're probably going to just choose your favorites and add them to a playlist while the rest of them kind of just linger. This is an early album, and a lot of the stuff off of here you're rarely going to see live. They're rarely going to perform it live, not only because of the vocal differential, but also just based on the material itself, though it does have some trademark songs on it. I look at songs such as Warmness of the Soul as real keynote examples of what Avenged Sevenfold was really going to be tailored to become. I feel like some of these tracks just had great songwriting precursors, but in reality, they were a group that was still experimenting a lot with their own style, and seeing that they could do a couple of different things and be a dynamic band as opposed to just a band in the metalcore realm that sticks within just the metalcore genre. There are tracks where the clean vocals are the more dominant force. There are slower songs that have elements of piano, and definitely the pace change certainly set Avenged Sevenfold apart from some other elements and other bands within the genre. And there's also a song in Streets that sounds like it's a straight-up punk song, which is definitely another nice style deviation where it really shows you that Avenged was not only influenced by a lot of different groups, but they could also replicate that with some pretty good success. Overall, this is an album that just feels kind of average, and in fact, I remember listening to this and whenever it first came out with one of my friends thinking, these guys could actually do some things, but this just doesn't feel like it's all of that inspiring. It's a decent album, but it's nothing special. Now, 14 years later, whenever you learn what the legend becomes, the metamorphosis process kind of really has almost an ironic twist to it. We have a band that has really transformed into something that it wasn't whenever it first came out. And how many times do we see that in music? It happens more than you actually think. This is a great stepping stone album for Avenged Sevenfold, and this is one that's definitely, for at least fans, one that the more metallic side of the fan base will certainly kind of flock to a little bit more. May not be the most perfect album, but for those that actually like the aggressive side of Avenged, they're going to love this album to bits. So after this, Avenged Sevenfold had really not too much in the way of choices to make, but they had to follow it up. And whenever you do a follow-up, it has to be bigger, badder, and better than the previous. So let's go find out if they actually did that. Let's find out what happened with Waking the Fallen.